Welcome back, boxing fans, to Sean on Boxing, the best boxing news in town. So, obviously, this past weekend, we had a huge card out of Saudi Arabia. Um, Sorry I didn't go live, but as I expected, it was a difficult live to do, considering it started in Taiwan at 11 p.m. and didn't finish until after 8 o'clock in the morning. So it was a long night after working all day Friday to then be up until 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning. Needless to say, after that, I ended up getting sick and the rest of my weekend was ruined. So I did not make any videos afterwards. So obviously it's Wednesday and I'm back up and at it. So I figured I would make my video now. So here I am. So hopefully you enjoyed that fight card. We definitely had some sensational results and obviously some very good fights and some less than stellar fights. Excuse me. We also had some big news and obviously a lot of that stuff, whether you agree with it or a fan of the news that's being reported, it's big news. And obviously for boxing, any news is good news. Anything that grabs the attention of the media and obviously highlights and headlines is definitely something that benefits the sport of boxing. So let's get to this and talk about what we saw this past weekend. So there we go, our weekly wrap up. Okay. So obviously this was the big card from Saudi Arabia, the AJ Ngannou fight. Crazily enough, in my build-up for this fight, I talked about how many of the American YouTubers didn't even talk about this fight. Literally, I saw Knockout Boxing talking about how great the PBC is and the great fights that they were having, and that this was any other promotional company putting out great fights. He would talk about those too. But ironically enough, he didn't talk about this card. And whether you agreed with the AJ Ngannou fight or not, there's plenty of other cards, plenty of other fights on this card that were worthwhile. World title fights literally on this card. So as a boxing fan, there was something for everybody. There was obviously British UK content. There was obviously world championship fights. There was obviously heavyweight elite level fighters. And then obviously there was this fight, which is definitely what we call a crossover fight between Francis Ngannou and Anthony Joshua. So let's just talk about some of these cards that obviously happened this weekend. I didn't watch the first few cards because I did try to get some sleep from probably 12 o'clock until 3. But, needless to say, it's difficult to go to bed, then wake up and then start to watch something at that time of the night. But let's get to the big event first, because obviously this is the one that, whether you agreed with it or you didn't, you cannot complain about the outcome. This is ultimately what boxing fans wanted to happen, right? This is what people felt was going to happen when Tyson Fury fought Francis Ngannou, that a fighter with no professional boxing experience is not going to be able to come into the pro game and actually compete with the elite level athletes. But unfortunately, that's not what happened in the Tyson Fury fight. Just the opposite. Francis Ngannou really showed himself to be legitimate. Dropped Fury, went tooth and nail with him. Some people even feeling that Francis Ngannou stole the fight or won the fight by a very close margin. Whether you agree with that or disagree with it, what you do have to identify is that it was a very competitive fight, something that the majority of people did not anticipate. I was not in favor of the whole Francis Ngannou Tyson Fury fight because literally Tyson Fury is a WBC world champion. As a WBC world champion, there's legitimate heavyweight fighters that he should be fighting, as opposed to fighting an MMA guy making his debut. For Anthony Joshua's point, things were different. AJ is not currently a world champion. He's just a contender. Obviously, based on Francis Ngannou's performance against Fury, now it legitimized a potential fight between him and Anthony Joshua. For Anthony Joshua, now people probably are capping and saying that they always knew he was going to win. But, you'd heard quite a bit of the opposite during that period of time. Many people felt that AJ's vulnerability over the last few years, his suspect chin, and the fact that mentally he's looked a little fragile in recent fights as well. People felt that how was he going to deal with Francis Ngannou's power, right? Um, so this was a real thing going into this fight. A lot of people were putting a lot of pressure on AJ that he needed to make a statement to save boxing, to showcase, the fact that some MMA guys should not be challenging the elite guys in the boxing division. But at the same time, this was a fight that if you want to get the big fights against the winner of Fury and Usyk, you need to stomp on this guy. You need to make a statement. If you struggle with him, it's not going to help build the legitimacy of you fighting one of those other fighters for undisputed. And Anthony Joshua did just that, exactly what I said he was going to do. I don't remember what round I predicted he was going to stop Francis. Obviously, I knew Francis was a very tough guy who had never been stopped in his career. So I did not take him for granted, and I did not assume that it was going to be easy work. But I did feel that AJ was just a far more skilled fighter based on just his boxing ability alone and his ability to use a very strong and powerful jab. That would ultimately be all he needed to beat Francis Ngannou. And obviously, him being a power puncher with legitimate knockout power, eventually he would break down Francis Ngannou and stop him. That was my prediction in that fight. And I can say that he definitely outperformed my anticipation. Here I have him by 8th round TKO. So while I did think AJ was going to stop Francis Ngannou, I did feel, excuse me, that because Francis Ngannou was such a big, strong, physical guy who would probably be able to manhandle AJ a little bit on the inside, that it would go a few rounds. I was blown away, like so many fans were, by the spectacular knockout that Anthony Joshua got. It's definitely, at this point, probably the knockout of 2024. And it's going to be very difficult for anybody to come along and do better. Excuse me, not that somebody's not going to be able to, but it's not going to be easy. That was a sensational knockout against a very strong opponent. And to knock him fucking unconscious and fold him like a lawn chair, that's a statement. And for AJ, this is not the first statement he's made recently. Obviously, he's faced two Tyson Fury opponents back to back, two fighters that Tyson Fury struggled with, right? If you want to be legitimate. And AJ destroyed both of them. So the buildup for a possible AJ Fury fight is just continuing to get more and more excited, because obviously now the legitimacy of that fight is really probably back to where it once was, where people now feel that AJ is a guy that could beat Fury. Whereas a while back, people felt that there was no way AJ was going to be able to beat him, and that, it wouldn't be that competitive a fight, and that Fury was just too good for him. But I think a lot of people have sort of come to a different, excuse me, way of thinking because of both of their performances. Piss poor performances on Tyson Fury's behalf, and obviously stellar, sensational performances on Anthony Joshua's. It was a great statement. I don't wish anything against Francis Ngannou. He made big money in this fight, so congratulations to him. It'll be interesting to see what he does next. Obviously, if you fight a lesser level heavyweight, you're not going to be getting paid this kind of money, right? So it would make more sense for him, based on this, to go back to the MMA, get paid probably more money than you would get paid currently as a boxer, because he's going to be able to fight, obviously, far better opponents. What I'd like to see him do is fight, obviously, my man, how come I can't think of his name? John Jones, Francis Ngannou, right? That's a fight I would love to see, truthfully. I'm a huge John Jones fan, and that would be a really, really hyped fight, especially with all the attention Francis Ngannou has gotten recently. So let's see what goes on next. But I do expect to see Francis in the MMA event as opposed to a boxing event. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Then, of course, we had a fight that many people felt probably was going to be the better fight of the night, better than AJ versus Ngannou, because obviously, real boxing fans like myself, we pretty much knew that AJ was just going to be a far more skilled and far too good fighter for Francis Ngannou. I talked about this with my friend who actually is a casual MMA fan, and he was saying that Francis Ngannou was going to win. So I made a bet with him, and he was very adamant that Ngannou was going to win. I'm like, dude, man, are you mental? There's no fucking way Francis Ngannou is going to fucking do anything with Anthony Joshua. Nothing. So I feel vindicated that I was proven correct. But this is a fight that really people had big expectations for. It was an interesting matchup, obviously, because we've seen Parker get stopped by Joe Joyce, which is no easy feat. Parker is a very tough man who's never been knocked out. And then to get stopped the way he did against Joyce, that was quite the performance from Joyce and a big statement. When obviously Joyce ended up then fighting Zhang, who people felt was a good fighter, but limited, didn't have a great gas tank. And ultimately, Joyce's great gas tank would probably just be too much for him. And only for us to be surprised with Zhang knocking Joyce out twice in back-to-back performances. Sensational performances for him. Obviously, the two biggest wins of his career. So going into this fight, most people felt that if you look at the triangle theory, the man that beat you got beat by him. So chances are he's probably going to beat you. But you can never use the triangle theory when you talk about boxing because styles make fights. In my prediction, I predicted that it wasn't going to play out the same way because Zhang is not Joyce. He's not a high volume puncher. He's not a guy who, with a punishing jab, who's just going to walk you down all night and pressure you and pressure you and pressure you, which ultimately is what burst the pipes for Parker. Zhang is not that kind of fighter, right? He's a guy that doesn't have a great gas tank. He doesn't throw a lot of punches. He is more of a counter puncher who lands big shots, and that's what he does. So I felt that Parker, being a very good boxer, very tough, very sturdy, would eventually just outwork and eventually stop Zhang late. That was my prediction. I think I went for a late stoppage, or did I? Oh no, okay, I went for a decision for Parker. There, Parker by UD. And that's exactly how it unfolded. And obviously, early on in that fight, it looked like Zhang was just going to walk right through Parker. He looked very dangerous early. And at that point, many people, myself included, were thinking that this guy just may be the best heavyweight boxer in the world, right? How dangerous he was, his power, and how fluid his shots came out. Not a fast puncher, but because they come out so smooth that they're deceptively quick, right? And he was even able to catch a guy like Parker, who defensively is a very good fighter, is not a guy who gets beat up and mauled and hit a lot. We've seen him fight AJ, and AJ had a very difficult time landing clean, effective punches against Parker for that whole fight. He ended up obviously beating Parker because Parker was far too defensive in that fight to actually win rounds. But, that same version of Parker, you feel it wouldn't be easy work for Zhang. And eventually, as I thought, Zhang would tire out and Parker would be able to take over the fight based on just his better gas tank. The fact that he would be able to win rounds like he did against, obviously, Deontay Wilder. So that was a great performance by Parker. Obviously, now it'll be interesting to see what he does next. Who's he going to be fighting? Apparently, there's a rematch clause, in the contract between him and Zhang. So his next fight will be with Zhang. I would like to see that fight happen in China, right? Like financially, if you want to think about how you could generate big money for both of these guys, Obviously, if you make that fight the rematch in China, China is going to represent. This is their big heavyweight fighter, obviously trying to come off of a loss against Parker. They're going to want to get behind him to motivate him to beat Parker, to put himself back in to big, obviously, potential world title events, to be the first Chinese heavyweight champion in history. So I definitely think it'd be a smart time to do it. I mean, if he loses to Parker again, you're going to lose all that momentum. And then obviously you just couldn't do such a mammoth event in China. So I think now is the time to jump on that wagon. But we will see what happens. But obviously for Parker, it was a great performance. Another great performance in a row. Parker's a young guy, man. So he still has a lot of opportunity ahead of him in the heavyweight division. Then, of course, we had this fight. I've been a big fan of Madrimov for a long time, but unfortunately, it's just been difficult for him to get fights. It's been difficult for him to not have shit fuck up, bad decisions, right? Weird decisions and mandatory rematches and just things that just really didn't allow him to fight as often as he should have. Didn't give him the opportunity to highlight himself as much as people originally were pushing him. Originally, people really were excited by his style, by his awkwardness, his speed and power. Obviously, with his very good amateur pedigree, people had big expectations for him at 154 pounds. But obviously, because the PBC and Charlo controlled the 154-pound division, it meant a lot of fighters fell through the cracks, and we didn't really get to see them fight. They weren't given opportunities to fight for world titles, so we didn't really know how good they were going to be. Obviously, now that Charlo is gonzo, now we are getting those opportunities, right? Obviously, Cal K is going to fight the IBF mandatory, the Russian kid. Obviously, Madrimov just got an opportunity to fight for the WBA title against the Russian fighter. And who else is fighting? Is Funduro fighting that Russian kid, right, for the WBC title or something? And then obviously Tim Tszyu is going to be fighting Keith Thurman. So right now, at least we're getting a lot of variety in the division, kind of similar to what we've just recently had at 140 and what obviously we're going to be getting at 135 pounds as well. And obviously what we're getting at 126, where we're getting a lot of great matchups for titles in these divisions. That's one of the good things about not having one undisputed champion. Ultimately, you get a lot of more intriguing fights for world titles because you just have more potential world title fights. When it's just one guy, obviously he cannot fight everybody all at once. So it ends up being maybe 2 fights a year. And if it's all in-house promotional fights, then a lot of guys that are good fighters don't necessarily get the opportunity to showcase themselves. But for Madrimov, this was a sensational performance. I did not expect him to go in and be as dominant. What was my prediction for him? Where is it? Madrimov. Wasn't Madrimov even on this card? That's weird, man. I'm surprised that he didn't put Madrimov here. Or I just missed him. Or I wrote Madrimov, and then McCann came up instead, which might have been the case. I don't know if there's a McCann that was there. But if it is Madrimov, then I predicted that he would win by unanimous decision. McCann. You know how sometimes fucking these things auto-correct, and I didn't really notice. So that's probably what happened. But I did think Madrimov was going to win. But I knew the Russian fighter was tough, had a good chin, and was resilient. But apparently there was some brain scan situation that potentially threatened to stop this fight from happening. As I said, again, with Madrimov having more bullshit getting in the way of his career. Luckily, the fight did happen. So he is the world champion. So, thank your lucky stars. Now we can move forward and have him stay busy and fight actively. But it's just one thing after another. But it was a great performance from him. I'm eager to see what he does next. I'd like to see him fight the WBC potential opponent, Funduro and the Russian kid, and see him fight one of them. Or even Mendoza, who's a very good opponent. Obviously, Mendoza got destroyed by Tim Zhu, but it'd be interesting to see how Madrimov would do against Mendoza. A big guy, bigger than Madrimov, obviously tough, been in with good opponents. So, it'd be a good litmus test just to determine how good Madrimov really was compared with the other guys in the division. Then, of course, we had this fight, which was pretty controversial from many people. For me, I've never been a fan of Ray Vargas. I think he's a boring fucking fighter, and this fight was no different. I knew he was a tough fighter, and he is, and he showed his toughness here. As far as Nick Ball, I never really had high expectations for him. He's just a young, aggressive fighter, but I don't think he's got much craft, and I think it was shown in this fight. A lot of fights. A lot of things he was doing was just winging shots, hoping to catch, obviously, Vargas, and he was lucky enough to get two knockdowns scored towards him. And obviously, many people feel that he deserved the victory. I did not have him winning on the cards. I felt Vargas won the fight. I know you had two knockdowns, but two knockdowns is not necessarily enough to win the fight. I mean, Manny Pacquiao knocked Juan Manuel Marquez down 3 times in one round and still ended up having a split decision or a draw on the first fight with him. So, you know, it's not the first time you've seen somebody get knocked down and actually not win the fight. Actually, on this card, we saw that as well with Tony Parker. Parker, who got dropped twice by Zhang and then went on to beat Zhang and win that fight, even though he got dropped twice. So I know Ball did drop Vargas, but I felt confident that Vargas won the fight. Don't get me wrong. I was hoping Ball was going to win. Not that I'm a big fan of Ball, but if he got rid of Vargas, that means I wouldn't have to watch Vargas fight anymore. And I could potentially see Ball fight Raymond Ford or one of the other interesting opponents at 126 pounds in a unification fight, which would be far more intriguing than seeing a potential rematch with Vargas and Ball, which is something I'm not looking forward to. Now I hear potentially Ball may fight Raymond Ford anyway on that Dubai card, the Matchroom versus Queensberry versus 5 matchup. And I hope that happens. That'd be a good fight. And for Raymond Ford, I think that's easy work. If he's able to beat Kolmatov, I think he'll kill fucking Ball, because Kolmatov is a much better all-round fighter than Ball is. Maybe he's not as physically resilient as Ball, but he's definitely a far more crafty and technically skilled fighter. Obviously has a much better jab and is able to fight in many different ways, as opposed to Ball, who's pretty one-dimensional. And the fact that he's so short with such a short reach, he would have a lot of trouble getting to a Raymond Ford, I feel. But don't get me wrong, I prefer that fight any day of the week to a rematch with Ray Vargas. If I never see Ray Vargas fight again, I won't be sad. Let's just put it that way. He is not an exciting fighter to watch. He's a very boring fighter in all actuality, even though I know he doesn't fit the typical narrative of being a boring fighter. I mean, if we want to use race to label everybody, he doesn't really fall into that. But race has never really been the precursor for a boring fighter. Stylistics, style, and just your mental makeup really has a lot to do with a fighter being boring. How you choose to fight and how you choose to win. And the way Vargas wins, I mean, he doesn't mind going and scrapping. He's obviously got toughness and heart, good chin. But yeah, some dudes just, you just can't enjoy watching them fight. He's one of them for me. Then, of course, you had this fight. This was the first fight that I watched on the card. Justice Huni fighting the tough man from South Africa. I knew this was going to be a good matchup. Obviously, what's his face is very experienced. And for Huni, obviously, Huni's an up-and-comer. I predicted that Huni would win by 7th round TKO. I was wrong there. Obviously, he did scrape a victory, but got really hurt and showed a lot of vulnerability, which really brings to question, what his real upside is. If you were to throw him in the ring, I think with cruiserweight champion right now, what's his face? I can't even remember his name, the Australian fighter. I think the cruiserweight would kill this guy, would kill him, kill him. I think Huni is okay. Obviously, he's a good fighter. He's got some skills, but I don't know what his upside is. It'll be interesting to see what happens with him moving forward. But at this point, I will say that I'm not that sold on him. Then, of course, afterwards, this news broke. I mean, that Tyson and Paul was fighting. You know, we had been hearing about it just prior as well. And obviously now everything was confirmed. You know, there's commercials going on, a lot of build up and push for it. For me, I see why the fight's being done. Obviously, it's a fight that I think is going to generate a shitload of cash. And the fact that it's going to be done on Netflix, is obviously a good thing as well. I mean, if Netflix is going to start showcasing these kind of events, it's not bad for them, right? They're just doing the same thing Amazon is doing, but the difference is, I mean, from what I know, it may be better for me if fights were on Netflix. It may be easier for me to actually watch these events, whereas on Amazon, I don't know if I'm going to even be able to watch live sporting events on Amazon. At least in Taiwan, when I look, I don't see any of it advertised. I don't see any possibility. I know on Amazon outside of Taiwan, people can watch football and other sports, but in Taiwan, no mayo. So we will see how that all unfolds. I cross my fingers and hope for the best. But if not, I'm lucky that at least this next fight card with with Canelo and Munguia is obviously going to be showed on DAZN as well, which means no problem. I can watch it on DAZN. So whether I can watch it on Amazon, it doesn't really matter. I can watch it on DAZN, so that's good. Peace. That's why I always said I prefer if everyone would join DAZN. It would just simplify boxing watching for all of us. We wouldn't have to jump from one platform to another, pay money to see things on multiple platforms. We could just all watch it on one platform and it'd be better for everybody. But some people are so narrative driven that they can't understand that. But as far as this fight, I have nothing against Jake Paul. Compared to his brother, I kind of have some respect for him, even though what Jake Paul's brother is doing with KSI for Prime and stuff, I give them some respect as well. They definitely fell on something and definitely potentially are going to become billionaires based on that if it's very successful. So more power to them. And if they hear this, hey, you know, make your friends fucking subscribe to my boxing channel for Christ's sake. It's not much you can do, and throw me a couple super chats. But as far as the brother, I appreciate the fact that you can see he really has a love for boxing, whereas his brother didn't. His brother did it because he's looking for an opportunity, right? A marketability type of thing. Whereas Jake really loves boxing and he's really dedicated himself to it. And because of that, I don't have any negativity towards him. Obviously, his fights I usually don't watch because I'm not interested in them at all. This fight, on the other hand, I'm a Tyson fan. So, of course, I'd be interested to see Tyson get back in the ring. I saw his fight with Roy Jones. Why wouldn't I watch his fight with Jake Paul? But I hope Mike Tyson knocks Jake Paul out. Not because I hate Jake Paul, but I just think, you know, I'd prefer if Mike Tyson made a huge definitive statement so that people would stop fucking trying to clout chase him to try to get paid big money fights. And if he really just fucking knocked the dude out, people would second guess throwing his name around and trying to fucking make money off of him, like Tyson Fury's father. Ugh. Which that would have been a fucking real joke. This, on the other hand, at least Jake Paul is taking boxing serious. So, you know, he is coming to win. He knows if he beats Tyson, even if it's an old ass Tyson, a Tyson older than me, um, it's still going to be quite a statement, right? For a guy basically who's a YouTube boxing sensation, which is what Paul is. But it'll be interesting to see really how much This sells. The Roy Jones Tyson fight did over 1 million pay-per-view buys. And I would think that a Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight is going to do well over that. I would not be surprised if it hit the 2 million mark. And if that's the case, Jesus Christ, right? It just tells you how important casual sports fans are to the sport, because hardcore fans, um, we spend a lot of money, we dedicate our lives to being fans of the sport, but we're not really the ones that move the needle, right? Not really. The ones that move the needle are casual fans, whether it's MMA, whether it's Instagram followers, or whoever that may be, right? And that's why guys like this are generating so much money. Um, so, it'll be interesting to see just the numbers itself. That's really the thing that I'm mostly intrigued by, right? Tank Davis is going to fight Frank Martin. You think that's going to do as much numbers as this? Uh, Canelo's fighting Jaime Munguia. Great fight. Great fight for boxing fans. For casual sports fans, on the other hand, obviously Canelo's got name recognition, but Jaime Munguia doesn't have that much. So I think Jake Paul Tyson does bigger numbers than that. Definitely does bigger than Tank Davis and Martin. And I think does bigger than Haney and Ryan Garcia. So that's going to really be a bit of a slap in the face to real boxing. But at the same time, would you be surprised? I'm not surprised. But let me know what you think about this. I know a lot of people are anti it. And don't get me wrong, I'm not uh, against that. I totally understand how you feel. This is the worst aspect to this. This fight potentially might be on the undercard. Manny Pacquiao versus Conor Benn. People say Manny Pacquiao's broke, but if you go check out Manny Pacquiao's net worth, he's not broke. But like Floyd Mayweather, like all these guys, if you can generate tens of millions of dollars for doing an event like this, that's far more money than you can generate in any other way now that you're retired. So you can understand why a one-off type of event, especially if they think potentially it can get a lot of attention and can make a lot of money, why this sort of piques their interest. For Pacquiao, he's a diehard sports fan, so I understand for him, it's in his blood. The same way Roy Jones fought way too long, the same way Muhammad Ali fought way too long, the same way many fighters just kept fighting when they should have retired years and years before. For Conor Benn, you know, I've never really been a big fan of his. I just thought, like Eubank, he mostly just cashed out on his father's success and his father's name. The difference between them and, say, a Tim Tszyu is that Tim Tszyu is dedicated on building his own fucking legacy, not basically just dick riding their fathers, which is what Eubank and Benn have done, right? So I've never been a fan of Benn. The first few times I watched him fight when he was young, I thought he was garbage, right? Not good at all. I think fucking Ali's grandson fucking shows more potential than he did. Obviously, he was accused of PEDs, and I would not be surprised at all because, how do you go from being shit to destroying dudes and then obviously getting caught and then being shit once again? Right? The writing seems to be on the wall that when you're on PEDs, you're dominant, but when you're not, you're pretty shit. So I think Pacquiao, even though he's fucking old, probably could still beat his ass. But at this point of your career, I'd rather not see Pacquiao stain his legacy by taking on fights when he's well past his best. Just doesn't make much sense. So I'm hoping this fight doesn't happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does. So here's this weekend's cards, fights that are going to happen, fights to keep an eye on this weekend. So obviously, William Zepeda is going to be fighting on a Oscar De La Hoya Golden Boy fight card. I mean, I think this is a great matchup. The winner of this William Zepeda Maxi Hughes fight is going to be the mandatory for the winner of Lomachenko versus George Kambosos. So a lot of people that are finding ways to somehow try to disrespect and criticize Lomachenko, you obviously just don't know fucking anything about boxing. Because if you did, you would understand whoever wins that fight is not getting some easy title fight. This is not like Shakur Stevenson, who won a WBC vacant title and potentially could fight God knows who next. He's not mandated or being forced by the WBC to take on, say, a Muratalla or anybody that's really dangerous. He may, but he's not being mandated to. Obviously, Tank Davis just got elevated by the WBA, and he could fight whoever he wanted. He chose to pick Frank Martin, but he could have fought anybody. They're not mandating him to face anybody, even though it was a vacant title that he's been given. Lomachenko, coming off of a loss, is going to take on George Kambosos. And if he is to be successful in that fight, he's going to have to take on the winner of William Zepeda versus Maxie Hughes. Most of us feel that William Zepeda is going to destroy fucking Maxie Hughes. So Lomachenko versus William Zepeda for the IBF world title fight sometime this year. That's a fucking dangerous matchup. William Zepeda is a non-stop machine. He is really the Margarito of this generation, right? At 140 pounds. And Lomachenko is what? This version's Manny Pacquiao, right? An older fighter who isn't what he once was, but obviously was quick and skilled. Uh, is he going to be able to dominate and destroy Margarito the way that Pacquiao did? Or is William Cepeda's volume and pressure and power just going to be too much for Lomachenko at this point? We saw Lomachenko not feel very comfortable throwing punches against a young, aggressive, hard-punching Teofimo Lopez. What's he going to do against William Cepeda, right? This is no easy fight. I mean, I think of William Cepeda against a Tank Davis, against a Shakur Stevenson, against any of those fighters is tough. Obviously, Tank Davis got the speed and power and the counter ability to potentially catch Zepeda on the inside and stop him impressively, right? For Shakur, he struggles with volume punchers who are awkward and aggressive. And William Zepeda is a far more dangerous fighter than De Los Santos, in my opinion. So, I definitely don't envy Lomachenko the possibility of fighting William Zepeda next, coming off of a George Kambosos victory. I would rather see him fight fucking Tank Davis or Shakur Stevenson instead of him. I just think those are not easier fights, but stylistically easier fights, right? On the undercard, of course, we have Floyd Schofield, who's going to be fighting a guy I'm unfamiliar with. It's a little disappointing for Schofield. He was being talked about potentially fighting Jojo Diaz, but we saw Jojo Diaz ended up getting beat in a fight that he wasn't expected to get beat in. And then that was going to be the fight. Floyd Schofield really getting his big name opponent in Jojo Diaz, but unfortunately things did not go the way they were anticipated. So now Floyd Schofield finds himself fighting a guy who, is considered number 62. So obviously ranked higher than Floyd Schofield, but a guy I've never even seen fight. So I don't know how good this guy Esterio Suera actually is. But if you guys know anything about him, let me know in the comment section below. But overall, those two fights, not too bad. Could be very interesting, very entertaining. Then, of course, what? Why did I have it twice? That's not supposed to be there. What's the other fight? Man, here, let me just check it here. That didn't work out, did it? Did I erase that? I hope not. I did too. Shit. It was the other card. What's the other card? Let's quickly find it. BoxRec, where are you? There's the Oscar Valdez card from Top Rank that's also happening this weekend as well. So where is this? 100 and... 30 pounds. Oscar Valdez. Come on. There we are. Valdez. So Valdez is going to be fighting Liam Wilson, the same Liam Wilson that many people feel deserved to beat Navarrete. So that in itself is an intriguing matchup because we saw Navarrete dominate and destroy Valdez, and many people feel that Liam was beating and should have got the knockout win over Navarrete. So now for them to match up, that's a pretty good fight. Uh, Sinesta Estrada is going to be fighting Yocasta Valle. Sorry if I butchered her name, which is a pretty good fight. Richard Torres Jr. is fighting Donald Hainsworth, which is a veteran fighter, obviously the kind of guy, a young guy like Torres is supposed to fight. Emiliano Vargas is getting back in the ring, and Art Barrero Jr. is on the card too. And I wonder if this Barrera is related to, uh, the great Barrera. But overall, it's not the best of cards, but it's nice to see Fernando Vargas's kid getting back in the ring, Torres as well. Obviously, Sinistro Estrada is in a big unification fight, I think, and Valdez Lee Wilson. That is a good fight. That probably is the best fight of the weekend, in truth. Uh, we'll see how it unfolds and see how Valdez bounced back after his ass beating that he got by Navarrete. Another fighter that happened this weekend as well is tough Cuban fighter that you can see right here, Osles Iglesias, who currently is 10-0 with 9 knockouts. He had a sensational performance on a card from Canada this past weekend as well. And it definitely shows you that the 168-pound division is no fucking joke. I mean, two of the best young fighters in this division, two Cubans. And not the typical Cubans, not boring defense first counter punchers, box safety first type of dudes. I mean, David Morrell is my favorite fighter at 168. I think he is by and far the best fighter at that division. But this kid who's up and coming obviously has good power, is aggressive as well. You Usley Iglesias obviously is one to keep an eye on as well. And you can see currently he's ranked number 11. Obviously, this weekend also at number 13, Kevin Sayo had a spectacular performance as well, getting another win on his resume. So there's two up and coming fighters. You have David Pacheco, who I think is great. Definitely underappreciated by the American boxing pundit, doesn't get much attention at all. But this is a guy who really is on the verge of getting a world title fight. And he's super dangerous. He's tall, long, has good power, and is a very, very skilled fighter. You get Bekmel Kuziev, who people were super high on until obviously he got knocked out by Rosado. Ended up beating Rosado in the rematch, and obviously he's trying to rebuild the hype that he had earlier on. But he's still pretty young. You have Edgar Berlanga, who obviously a lot of people are talking about. Obviously, Caleb Plant, who needs to bounce back after his loss to obviously Benavidez, a fight that you and me, I'm sure, would love to see would be him versus Charlo, right? Sure, Charlo doesn't really deserve a fight with Canelo at this point, and it just doesn't make sense. But if you throw Charlo in with Plant, who's coming off of a loss to David Benavidez, that shit makes sense, man. That's a great fight. Obviously, there's a grudge match between them. Plant smacked Charlo in the chops. So, that fight should be very interesting and definitely a good PBC fight. Then obviously you have Christian Mbilli, who I'll break some news in a minute. Jaime Munguia, who's obviously going to be fighting number one ranked Canelo Alvarez on May 4th. And then Dave Benavidez, who now currently is moving to 175. So I think we're probably never going to get to see him fight at 168 again. So a lot of the clout chasing on Canelo Alvarez, I think that's all it is, because his team never legitimately has pushed for Canelo Alvarez fight. But they love to tie their name to him, right? To help utilize his name to build up theirs. And that's what they've done. Obviously, last year they had a good year. They beat two legitimate fighters, Plant and Andrade, two guys here on this list that are both considered top 10, 168 pounders. So you can't knock him for that. But literally, this is the best part of his career. These are the two best opponents he's ever fought. And that was in 2023, right? What was he doing when he was a world champion? He wasn't fucking doing that. But let's get to the last piece of sort of news that popped up. So Christian Mbilli, 26-0 with 22 knockouts, French fighter, obviously Cameroonian, French, now fights out of Montreal, Canada, 28 years old. Very exciting, aggressive, come forward, overwhelm you type of fighter. He just signed with Top Rank. I don't know what the benefit of signing with Top Rank truly is. Like, if we go back for a minute and just look at this current rankings, obviously Canelo is a PBC fighter, but he's more of a free agent than anything. Could easily be back on the zone after this next fight. Benavidez is PBC. Jaime Munguia is obviously DAZN. Derevchenko, I think he's kind of a free agent. Mbilli, obviously now Top Rank. Plant, PBC, Andrade, PBC, Morel, PBC, Berlanga, DAZN, Shishkin, I'm not sure where he is. Ulysses Iglesias, I'm not sure if he's actually signed to a major promoter yet. Bekmel Kuziev, DAZN, Sajo, I don't think he has a major promoter. Eric Bazinian, well, him and probably Mbilli were probably attached to that French-Canadian promoter. So, I'm not sure outside of that who they're connected to. Diego Pacheco, I think he's also DAZN as well. So it's a split between PBC and DAZN. There's no ESPN fighters in the top 15. So I don't know what Christian Mbilli expects to do now that he's part of Top Rank. Like, if he moves up to 175 pounds, okay, now that shit makes sense. 175, Top Rank has quite a few fighters there. Obviously, currently they have a 3-belt unified fighter out of Canada in Better BF. And if they want to potentially chase Christian Mbilli versus Better BF in an all-Canadian undisputed shootout on Top Rank ESPN, okay, that should make sense. But I don't know how big financially that fight is. Obviously, if Better BF destroys Bivol and becomes undisputed, that may make him a far more marketable fighter. But he's also 38 years old. So it's not as if he's going to be around for fucking a long time defending those titles. So, obviously, Mbilli may be the new potential superstar, French-Canadian, top-ranked fighter to sort of take over after Better BF. You never know exactly what they're thinking. But it's going to be interesting. I'm curious what his next fight is going to be, because obviously just signing with Top Rank, ultimately they're going to be putting him in the ring soon on a card, right? Because that's generally what happens. When you sign with somebody, it's not that long afterwards where, you get your first sort of showcase fight. And usually that's what it is. It's a showcase fight. They put you in with somebody that you should look good against to give you a paycheck, sort of a goodwill sort of gesture, and give you an opportunity to make a statement on the new platform before they start putting you in tough. So I would expect something similar to be happening for Christian Mbilli next, but it'll be curious to see what happens. Obviously, at this point, is there a lot of choice for him? I'm not sure if there is. You can let me know in the comment section below what you think about Christian Mbilli joining Top Rank, and if it was a smart move, or if he should have signed with DAZN, or even potentially the PBC. I mean, with the PBC, if Benavidez was still there, but he don't want to fight fucking David Morrell, right? All these people talk about Canelo Alvarez ducking Benavidez, but what about Benavidez blatantly ducking fucking Morrell? This was an in-house PBC opponent, a guy that your manager literally said you'd signed a contract to fight, a guy who's openly been calling you out for a number of years now. And you're not getting the Canelo Alvarez fight, so why not face Morrell? No. You'd rather go to 175 to take on a guy coming out of 4 years of fucking retirement in Vosdik, who got knocked the fuck out by Better BF. As if that's a more proven fight, or a higher level fight. It's not to me, and I don't think any real hardcore boxing fan sees a Bozdick fight in the same fucking light that they'd see a David Morrell fight. If Benavidez would have fought Morrell, people would have been hyped about that. That fight would have got tons of hardcore attention because people know it's dangerous. It's kind of like the equivalent of Bud Crawford signing to fight Boots Ennis, right? We don't expect it to happen because we expect Bud Crawford is going to go for bigger money options. But if he was to sign to fight Boots Ennis, people would go fucking crazy. They'd be like, man, that's a great fight. And I'm so excited that it's going to happen because it didn't look like it would happen, right? It's not the kind of fight we expect to happen. But if it did happen, people would lose their shit over it. That's like better be a Benavidez versus Morrell. It's the same, right? Maybe not quite to the same extent, but very similar, very similar. Um, as far as Bud Crawford, apparently now his next fight is going to be against Chris Eubank. I've heard a lot of people kicking back against that on my timeline. I'm like, dudes, man, literally Bud Crawford just fought the biggest fight in probably the last 5 years against Errol Spence, a fight that the majority of YouTubers in America were picking against him. And he went in there and fucking destroyed Errol Spence, basically sent Errol Spence into retirement, right? Because I don't expect to see Errol Spence in the ring again. But for Bud Crawford now, after this performance, people want him to fight Boots Ennis. But yeah, that's a great fight. But it doesn't generate a lot of money. It's a dangerous, risky fight that you don't win any additional title and you don't get a big payday for. So why would you do it? It makes no fucking sense at all. Moving up to face Canelo Alvarez, I mean, well, it's not a fight I would want him to do, and I don't expect him to do it. I can understand why he would. The same way Charlo fucking went up to 154 to 168. This is why, right? You're not going to make more money in any other fight. Obviously, a fight I would have loved to see Crawford in is the winner of Thurman versus Zhu. That's a big fight. He can become a four-weight world champion, right? So you're winning, you know, hardware, right, to add to your legacy. And it's obviously a big money fight. And if it's Tim Zhu and you go to Australia to do the fight, then it's even bigger money because Bud Crawford would be the A side for that because you'd have to pay him the A side money because he's the legend, right? That fight would be huge in Australia because you're bringing a legend there. It's like when they brought Pacquiao to fight Jeff Horn. Pacquiao made more money than Horn, even though Horn was the Australian fighter. He's the one that had the crowd behind him. He's the one that had the TV networks paying money to get the fight to happen in Australia. But you need the opponent that's going to sell and get casual sports fans' attention. And that would be Bud Crawford. As far as him facing Eubank, if this fight happens in Dubai or Saudi Arabia or the UK, even though I don't think it can happen in the UK now, not now that obviously Bomac got arrested for a gun charge in the UK. As far as in the States, I don't think it's a big fight in the States. I don't know if Americans really know that much about Chris Eubank and see him as a star. So I don't know if you could generate big money fighting Chris Eubank in the US, but I'm not sure how it's going to unfold. Obviously, Eubank is a good opponent. He's coming off of a knockout win in his last fight, even though part of that he got knocked out. So, you have two ways to think about it. You could think that he's really not that great, or it was just an off night and he got caught, right? And obviously trained better in the rematch, bounced back, and was dominant the second time around. We've seen that happen plenty of times in boxing. So, like I said, it's not the fight I was really looking forward to. At this time, it's tough for Crawford because he wants to get the bag. He's 37 years old. But, who are you going to fight to get the bag? Right? That's the position you find yourself in. But let me know what you think about past weekend's cards, about the upcoming cards, boxing matches this weekend. Obviously, Valdez is fighting, and so is Zepeda, two very good young 135 pound fighters. Obviously, Valdez, an ex-world champion. Zepeda is putting himself in position to fight the winner of Lomachenko, George Kambosos, for that IBF vacant title. So that's a great fight, and obviously his first opportunity or first crack at a world title. So leave your comments below. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think of today's video, and I will see you next time. Peace out, everyone. Enjoy your week. The weekend is coming. Tomorrow's Thursday for me.